Hello, students. This is Miss Wachuku, and I just want to start off by saying how much we miss you guys. And we're all doing the best we can to provide you with meaningful lessons to continue your learning. To quote Peter Drucker, knowledge has to be improved, challenged, and increased constantly, or it vanishes. We want to make sure that you guys hold on to your knowledge. We want to make sure that you guys continue learning. Learning is a lifelong process, and so we're trying to continue, guys, to stimulate your brains and your cells, your brain cells, to keep making those connections. Today, we're going to be talking about abiotic and biotic factors. Make sure that you guys have your guided notes to make sure you guys are following along, please. And this is something that you guys talked about in 7th grade. We're just adding on a little bit more to it. And actually, I think you guys may have talked about it in 6th and 7th grade, so it's not new. You have a lot of good background information. So I'm going to let you guys think for a minute. What do you think biotic and abiotic factors are? Okay, do those words sound familiar to you? Starting off with some essential questions. What are biotic and abiotic parts of an ecosystem, and how do organisms and populations in an ecosystem depend on and compete for biotic and abiotic factors? Our learning goal is we will investigate how organisms and populations in an ecosystem depend on and may compete for biotic factors such as food. So I already see, once again, this word is a vocabulary word that you need to know. Now, what I do like, and I mentioned it in class, is when it says such as, it's giving you an example. So this is nice. Biotic factors such as food, and then it says abiotic factors such as quality of light, range, water, range of temperatures, or soil composition. So make sure that you guys refer back to this because it gives you those examples, okay? And once again, how organisms and populations in an ecosystem depend on and compete. All right, so that's what we're going to be looking at today. Success criteria. By the end of the lesson, you'll be able to do two things. List the abiotic and biotic factors in an ecosystem. Investigate how organisms and populations in an ecosystem compete for those biotic and abiotic factors. All right, so we're going to start off with the levels of organization in an ecosystem. Remember, everything, especially in science, has an order. So we're going to start off from small to big, right? Big being the whole ecosystem, all right? So we're going to start off with an organism, a single individual form of life, such as a plant, an animal, a bacteria, a protist, or a fungus. And by now, by the way, you should start filling in those blanks. This is the first blank, which is organism, which is an individual form of life. Then underneath it lists your 4 examples: plant, animal, bacterium, protist. It doesn't say fungus on there. If you want to add it, you can, okay? So once you combine, like for example, right here you had 1 elephant. Another type of an organism would be 1 hyena, 1 lion, 1 antelope. All right, so all of those single organisms, once again, 1 form of life. When you combine several now elephants, all right, when you combine several hyenas, you now form a population. So once again, comprised of all the individuals of a given species in an area. So a group now, it's no longer a single organism. Now it's a group of elephants, like you see in your picture, that makes up a population of elephants, comprised of all the individuals of a given species, once again, of a single species in an area at a certain time. A elephant population, a hyena population. Once you combine all the hyenas, that makes a hyena population, a lion population. Not all individuals are identical. Most importantly, not all members of the population are equal in their ability to survive, okay? Now, what happens when you put all the populations together? Your lion population, your elephant population, your antelope population. Now you form a community, which is what you see in that picture. The populations of organisms of different species in a specific area at a given time. So in this community, we see the elephant, antelope in the back. We see the zebras and a giraffe back here, all kind of living together in a specific area at the same time. All these populations coming together. Okay. Next, we have abiotic and biotic factors. Finally, all of these make up your ecosystem. All of the living biotic and all of the physical non-living factors abiotic in an area. Ecosystems can only support a certain number of individuals based on the amount of food, water, living space, mates, and other resources. So looking at that picture, the learning goal had told us that biotic factors, such as food. What things there could be food? You have insects over here. This kangaroo. You have plankton, bacteria, these fish. You have fungi and even plants. So all of those are biotic. Then we have abiotic, which would be sunlight and heat. All right, that's not living. Think about it. Does it have cells? No. What about water? Now, a lot of students think that there's a misconception that water is living. No, there's living things in the water, but the water itself is not living. Okay, so think about that. Next, biotic factors. Once again, make sure you're following along with your guided notes. Biotic factors, bio means life. So once again, bio means life. This means living or once living organisms in an ecosystem. Some examples of living or once living organisms are animals, plants, fungi, and bacteria. Now, what happens if we cut down that tree that's in your picture? Would the rotting tree, like it's already wood and it's dying off, it's rotting and decaying, would it still be considered biotic? Yes, because right here it says once living organism. That tree was once living, so it's considered biotic. Anything that is decaying or rotting. Next, we have abiotic factors. Because it starts with an A as a prefix, it means for not or without. So not living or without life. These are non-living elements in the ecosystem, such as your water, your air, soil, which includes rocks and minerals, sunlight, and temperature. I'll give you guys a minute to copy that down once again. Make sure you're following along with your guided notes. Water, air, soil, sunlight, and temperature. All right. Now, I know it says number 1. We're going to be ignoring that one because it says stand up and find a partner. What I want you to do is not even worry about the T-chart. If you want to, you can, but just looking at the picture, what are some of the biotic and abiotic factors that you see in this ecosystem? Give you guys a minute to analyze the picture. Let's start off with biotic, which once again means life. What are the living things you see on there? I see some turtles, right? I see the fish down here, big and small, the dragonfly, the ladybugs, the beetles, the frogs. Now, once again, even grass. Grass is living. These plants over here, the algae, if there's any algae down here, these trees, all of that is living, okay? Now, abiotic, which is not living, would be your sunlight, heat, water. Like I said, the water itself is not living, but it does sustain life. But the water is non-living, it's abiotic. Temperature, things like that, okay? Next, what would happen if 2 mice produced 56 baby mice each year? And so we start off with 2, and from those 2 we multiply to 56 baby mice. What happens if each of those mice has 56 babies each year themselves. Calculate the total mice born in 1 year started by the original pair. Wow. So 56 times 56 is 3,136. We'd be run over with mice on the planet. But are we run over with mice? No, we're not. Why is that? First of all, there's something called the carrying capacity, which is the largest number of individuals of the same species that an area can support. If the population exceeds or is too much, goes over the carrying capacity, some individuals will die or move to another location. Those are determined by elements called limiting factors. So an ecosystem can only support so many predators, so many prey. There's a limited number, once again, a limited number that it can support in the same area. Okay? Once again, I'll give you guys some time to fill in those blanks. So we'll ignore number one. What is the carrying capacity of this fish tank? Right now, it looks like it can support maybe about 20 different species of fish, and it can support 2 different species of fish, right? 2 different populations of fish. What would happen if a small bass was added to the tank? So those of you that like to fish, what would happen if we added a bass, even if it was a small bass? What would happen if we added it to that tank? First of all, it would get crowded in there, right? Because it takes up much more space than those smaller fish. And the next question is, how would the bass affect the carrying capacity of the tank? Would the bass overpower these smaller fish for food? Would it start eating the smaller fish for food? So once again, those are just some things. There's that small tank can only support so many organisms, and they're going to start competing for food. And what might happen is that bass might actually overpower them and eat them. All right, so we have the limiting factors. Limiting factors are an abiotic or biotic factor that limits the number of individuals that can live in an ecosystem. This keeps the population from growing too large. Once again, living and non-living limits, things that can limit the number of organisms. We start off with biotic factors that can limit, which would be competition for food. All right, so when you have 2 different organisms fighting for the same food, and what happens if those resources are scarce, meaning that there's very few resources, very few food. Right there we see a picture where a squirrel and birds are fighting for the same food. If there's limited numbers of food, then you're going to have a smaller number of organisms that can survive. When resources are plentiful, meaning there's a lot of food and there's an abundance of food, then you're going to have greater numbers of organisms that can survive. All right, so food and the number of organisms go hand in hand. A little bit of food, a little bit of organisms. Great amount of food, greater number of organisms because they're thriving. Okay, they're being well fed. Predator-prey relationships are another biotic factor. So if we have, looking at that picture, if we have a large number of prey, a large deer population, that's going to be able to support a large wolf population. Because you have more food, now my wolf population can thrive and grow. Now what happens if your deer population is low? Your deer population is low, then obviously you're not going to be able to support that many wolf. So all of a sudden, your wolf population decreases. Once again, greater number of prey, then you're going to be able to support greater number of predators. Fewer prey, you're going to be able to support fewer predators. Parasitism is when an organism lives off of a host organism, sometimes killing the host. So parasites, for the most part, pretty much kill the host. if it's not taken care of. For example, worms in an animal digestive tract, mistletoe in trees, pine bark beetle invade and kill off pine trees. Give you guys some time to copy that down. Next, which is what we're looking at now, disease. When outbreaks kill off most or all of the population. Influenza outbreak causes millions of human deaths in 1918. So in 1918, caused millions of human deaths. Lyme disease carried by ticks. Now, right now we don't have, millions, thank God, but we do have a disease that is affecting our elderly population, which, by the way, you guys are young, and for the most part, young people are getting over this disease, but think of how many elderly you come in contact with, okay? We need to protect our elderly, our population, okay? They're the ones that are being affected most by this. Human activities destroy animal habitats. For example, with our development, damming rivers, clear-cutting the forest. Right in front of Esili, we have a perfect example. They're cutting down that area of forest to develop some houses. I used to be able to see deer right in front of our school. They would sometimes come over to the school and be on our grounds. You don't see those deer anymore. Why? Because we're destroying their habitat. We're destroying their shelter, their home, possibly their food sources. So once again, human activities destroy animal habitats. All right, let's look at that picture. What kind of competition is taking place between the tree and the giraffe? Are they competing for those biotic factors such as food? Do they eat the same things? No, not necessarily. Do they compete for shelter? Not necessarily. So what kind of things would they be competing for? If it's not biotic, it could be abiotic factors. So they can be competing for sunlight. They can be competing for water, for the soil, right? Explain how both have adapted to this competition. So we have the tree that doesn't want to get eaten, has outgrown the height of the giraffe in order to not be eaten, okay? This giraffe cannot reach the leaves up there. So once again, are these biotic or abiotic? Those would be abiotic. So how do abiotic factors limit organisms in an ecosystem? First of all, we have the sun, which is the availability increases photosynthesis. Plants compete for sunlight by growing taller than those around them. The taller you are, the more sunlight you're able to reach, like in the rainforest. All right, that's why you have those high canopies. Temperature. Warm, lush areas support greater numbers of populations with less competition occurring. Cold, harsh areas support limited number of populations with greater competition occurring. That's why in the rainforest it's warmer, right? And so you support a lot more biodiversity. Biodiversity is a word you guys learned in 7th grade, which means variety of life. Biodiversity, variety of life. In the rainforest, you have a lot of different organisms, a lot of plants, a lot of species of animals and plants, and they're all growing and they're thriving because, once again, you have warm, lush areas. Colder areas, such as your tundra, supports limited number of populations, so you have less plants, less variety of animals as well, okay, because of the adaptations. They have to be a little different. Your soil, nutrient-rich soil produces more carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and supports a larger population. You have less competition. Nutrient-poor soil supports smaller populations. So once again, in the rainforest, that soil is rich in all of these things, so it's able to support more types of plants. Whereas in the desert, you have nutrient-poor soil, and not all plants can live there, so you have very scarce amount of plants in a desert. water. You have your availability, movement, temperature, saltiness, chemical components, quality, all affect competition and ability to survive in populations. If you have freshwater fish, they cannot or live or thrive in the ocean because they require fresh water, not salt water. Your ocean is bigger, so it's able to support a lot more variety, biodiversity of animals and plants. Whereas, say, a local pond or creek would have less types of organisms living in it just because the ocean is bigger and it has a lot more resources than that little pond. Okay. We have changing conditions such as drought, flood, volcanic eruption, earthquake, which brings about changes that reduce populations. A drought, if something were to happen, for example, loss of water, then you wouldn't be able to support that many organisms. Same thing with a flood. Volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, they would displace animals, either kill them if it happens suddenly, or they would have to move. They would be displaced. All right, so they would be moving to a new area. So once again, looking at that same picture that we looked at before, what would happen if a drought occurs and all the water in the pond dries up? Give you guys some time to think. Who is depending on that water? First of all of them. Who directly, that's their habitat, that's their home. Looking at these fish right here, they would be affected because if there's no water, they die. These turtles, the frog, all of these animals depend on that water. Okay. Now, the raccoon, the deer, all of those animals also depend on the water, but they have the ability to migrate, to move in case they need to. Okay. All biotic and abiotic factors are interrelated. In nature, you will find that if one factor is changed or removed, it impacts the availability of other resources within the system. What factor was removed from this ecosystem? So we can see in the picture, what's missing is water. There was a drought. How did it affect the population in the ecosystem? Well, even if humans brought him water, right? This is a cow, I'm assuming. Even if humans brought him water to drink, how does it affect him in another way? What does he eat? Normally he would be grazing, right? On the grass perhaps, but if there is no water, there is no grass. Okay, so once again, right here, he's being affected because there is no food for him because the water isn't there to be able to grow. So once again, hopefully by now you have been able to list the abiotic and biotic factors in an ecosystem and kind of investigate how organisms and populations in an ecosystem compete for biotic and abiotic factors. If you guys need any help with your homework, if you have any questions, please make sure you reach out to us on Schoology, and we will try our best to help you with those questions and to answer them as quickly as possible. Have a great day, guys. Stay safe and be careful. Bye-bye.